Hi, my beautiful family. It's wonderful to have you back at Wisdom Post Stories, a place where our souls unite through powerful narratives. Tell me, from which part of our beautiful planet are you watching? Did previous stories touch your heart? Your thoughts bring warmth and meaning to this gathering. Sleep was far from my eyes, and I was simply lying awake in a restless state, my gaze fixed on Adnan sleeping next to me. He was a 12-year-old, round-faced, very handsome boy who appeared slightly older than his age. I kept looking at him from head to toe while many thoughts were running through my mind. I slowly ran my hand through his hair and began observing his features closely. His delicate pink lips were so very lovely. When he shifted his position, his eyes opened. Finding me staring at him, he asked, "What's the matter, sister? You're still not asleep?" He called me sister because he was my aunt's son, and I was like an older sister to him. That's why he slept next to me rather than with his mother. I smiled and replied, "I can't sleep. You go ahead." He sat up and said, "If you can't sleep, sister, let's play something." Hearing this, my mind began racing. He himself was willing to play with me. I immediately said, "All right, let's play dolls." At first, he looked at me in surprise and asked, "Sister, you're going to play dolls with me?" I smiled and said, "Yes, why not? Can't I play with dolls?" He replied, "But sister, you've grown up now, and I've never seen you playing with dolls before." I pinched his cheeks and said, "I'll be the doll, and you'll be the doll's groom. We'll get married, and it'll be so much fun. Then you'll do whatever I say, and you'll see how great the game will be. We'll play like the doll and groom get married." 12-year-old Adnan was an innocent child. He wasn't aware of my intentions, nor did he have any idea what I was planning. That's why he quickly nodded in agreement, saying, "Sister, it'll be so much fun. I've never played with dolls before. I'm a boy, so Mama always gives me video games and stuff. Today, I'll play dolls with you." He was very excited, and my heart was beating even faster than his. I took out a red scarf and draped it over my head like a bridal veil. Then I said, "All right, Adnan, now you be the groom." I used another scarf to wrap a turban around his head. He sat down next to me, imagining himself as the groom, and then lifted my veil and stared at me with his big eyes. I gently explained to him what the doll was supposed to do with the bride after the wedding. He was surprised at first, but then said, "Sister, if Mama finds out, she'll get angry. You know how strict she is." I held Adnan's hand and assured him, "Don't worry, I'm here. Nothing will happen. This game is really fun. Once you play it, you'll see." There was a nervous expression on his face, but when I insisted that he listen to me, he reluctantly agreed. I quickly tossed aside the veil and forced him. My parents had passed away when I was just 10 years old. It was then that my aunt placed her hand on my head and brought me to live with her. The house my parents had lived in belonged to my grandparents. My uncle and aunt sold it and took me in. At that time, my aunt was the only family I had left. I spent all my time with her, and in the beginning, she was very affectionate toward me because she had no children. But after about 7 years, she became pregnant. During her pregnancy, her health began to deteriorate. She was often unwell, making it difficult for her to manage household chores. I ended up taking care of everything around the house during those months. By then, I was about 16 years old. I did all the chores myself, no matter how big or small. Every household task, every small responsibility. I shouldered it all without complaint. I didn't let my aunt set foot off her bed. For me, she was everything. She had raised me, cared for me, and become the closest family I had left. In return, I loved her deeply, and I never wanted her to suffer. In many ways, I treated her as if she were a child, ensuring that she rested completely while I took care of every household responsibility. She meant so much to me that I even felt guilty if she so much as had to lift a finger. When I was younger, I completed my education up to the 10th grade. My aunt, however, didn't enroll me in further studies after that. I didn't think much of it at the time. It seemed natural to stay home and help her with the work. With no school to attend, my days became routine. Waking up, doing all the housework, and then retreating to my room once everything was done. At first, this felt normal, but gradually I began to notice the quietness that surrounded me. It was as if life outside the house had moved on, leaving me behind. I rarely had visitors or saw anyone my age, and over time it seemed as if the world beyond our home was a distant memory. As the years went by, I started to change. By the time I turned to 17, I had grown taller, my face more defined. My features softened, yet carried a maturity I hadn't seen before. My once childish figure became that of a young woman, and I began to notice how others looked at me. Even my aunt, whom I cared for so much, would sometimes glance at me with an unfamiliar expression. "Cover yourself," she would say, almost sternly. I didn't understand why she said that at first. I would nod and wrap my scarf more tightly around me, but I didn't truly grasp her meaning. I thought she was just being protective, looking out for me as she always did. But then one day, I understood exactly what she had meant. Something happened that opened my eyes to the complex, often unsettling truths about the world of men and women, truths I had never considered before. Until that moment, I was completely unaware of the subtleties, the dynamics, and the emotions that could exist between a man and a woman. When the realization came, it was so unexpected, so profound that it left me shaken. It wasn't the kind of knowledge I had sought out. Rather, it had found me, and once I knew it, I couldn't unknow it. During this time, my aunt entered the 7th month of her pregnancy. She had been struggling more and more with her health. Her face looked pale, her steps slower. One day, her condition took a sudden turn. She became very ill, and when my uncle came home from work, he immediately rushed her to the hospital. I stayed behind, consumed with worry. I walked around the house, unable to sit still. Questions kept swirling through my mind. Would she be okay? Would the baby be born early? It didn't help that I had no one to talk to. It was just me in the empty rooms of our home. That evening, around 10 p.m., my uncle returned home alone. His face looked weary and tense. He sank into the sofa as if the weight of the day had pressed heavily on his shoulders. "Could you bring me some water and a cup of tea?" he asked quietly. I hurried to the kitchen, eager to do something that might provide him a moment of comfort. While I prepared the tea, I couldn't stop thinking about my aunt. Was she stable? How much longer would she have to stay in the hospital? When I brought the tea to him, I asked about her. "Your aunt's condition is very serious," he said. "She'll need to stay in the hospital, and they may have to perform surgery very soon." Although I was still young, I understood what he meant. My aunt was likely going to give birth prematurely. The thought worried me even more. I felt a wave of sadness and fear, and I couldn't help but pray for her and the baby. At the same time, I wanted to ensure my uncle felt supported. I set the tea tray down before him, asked if he wanted any food, and then moved to straighten up. As I did so, I noticed his gaze lingering on me. My scarf had slipped to one side, and the neckline of my dress, borrowed from my aunt's wardrobe, was a little too low. Embarrassed, I quickly adjusted my scarf. I tried not to think about it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but his prolonged glance stayed in the back of my mind. He asked if I had eaten, and when I said no, he replied, "I'll order something for both of us. We'll eat together." He gestured for me to sit down next to him. I hesitated for a moment before complying. As I sat, he reached for my hand. "I'm so worried about your aunt," he said softly. "I don't know what's going to happen." His voice sounded heavy, full of concern, and yet his touch felt unusual. Too firm, too deliberate. It was the first time he had ever held my hand like that, and I felt uneasy. I tried to reassure him. "She'll be okay. Don't worry so much," I said, hoping my words would help calm him. Quietly, I tried to pull my hand back, but he leaned his head onto my shoulder and held my hands tightly. "I love your aunt so much," he continued, "and that's why I'm so upset." I believed he truly cared for her, so I stayed there, offering him what little comfort I could. After a few moments, the food arrived. He asked me to set it up in his bedroom so that we could eat together there. I wasn't sure if that was appropriate, but I didn't want to seem unhelpful. I carried the food to his room, placed it on a tray, and sat down across from him. This time, I made sure my scarf was securely in place. We were the only ones in the house, and the silence around us felt heavy. As we ate, I tried to focus on the meal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were fixed on me, watching my every move. The once familiar comfort I had felt around him seemed to have vanished. I thought that I would quickly finish my meal and go to sleep. But as soon as we finished eating, Uncle asked me to massage his feet. "I've been standing all day at the hospital," he explained. Slowly, I began pressing his feet. He leaned back on the bed with his eyes closed, and I continued to massage his feet. Just then, the power went out. I was terrified of the dark. A sudden scream escaped my lips. Uncle quickly grabbed me in his arms and said, "What's there to be afraid of? I'm right here." As I clung to his chest, a jolt went through my body. I wanted to pull away, but he held me tightly. Slowly, he started running his fingers along my neck and said, "You're not alone. I'm here with you. Tonight we'll play dolls together. You love dolls, don't you? Ever since you came here, you've been playing with them. Tonight, you'll be the doll and I'll be the groom." Uncle's words didn't make any sense to me. Stammering, I asked, "What kind of game?" He replied, "In the doll and groom game, there's a wedding. Then the doll becomes the bride. Tonight, we'll play that same wedding game together." Still holding me tightly, Uncle got up from the bed and walked over to the closet. He turned on the flashlight on his phone and a faint light filled the room. I stood frozen, sweating. Uncle opened the closet and pulled out a nightgown, holding it out to me. He said, "Just like you used to sew little clothes for your dolls and dress them up, this is also a special outfit. Tonight you'll wear this because tonight you're the doll." Looking at the outfit, I felt deeply embarrassed. It was entirely inappropriate for me to wear, but Uncle began unbuttoning my shirt. His fingers moved slowly over me, and I started trembling violently. I told him I wanted to go to my room, that I was sleepy. He smiled and said, "Tonight isn't for sleeping. We're finally alone after so long. Normally, your aunt is always in the way. Hurry up and put this on. If you don't, I won't bring your aunt back from the hospital." Uncle's words were chilling, and my whole being shivered at his tone. Under his pressure, I reluctantly put on the nightgown. When Uncle saw me in that outfit, his eyes glimmered with desire. He said, "You look just like a real doll." Then he laid me down on the bed and said, "Now I'm the groom and you're the doll. Let's play." And then he played that game in such a way that my soul was wounded. I screamed and cried, but it didn't make any difference. He merged himself into me so completely that I had no strength left even to scream. That night was like the end of the world for me. The next morning, Uncle got ready to go to the hospital. He said, "Your aunt's operation is today. Once the baby is born, I'll take you to the hospital as well. But don't you dare tell anyone about our game. Your aunt is very sick. If she finds out we spent the whole night playing, she'll think you took advantage of her being in the hospital." He threatened me further, leaving me terrified. I was trembling with fear until he finally left. After he was gone, I broke down in tears. He had locked the door from the outside. When I finally managed to calm down a little, I cleaned up, cooked, and also tidied my aunt's room. I didn't know when she would return from the hospital. That evening, when Uncle returned, he told me they had a son. When he arrived home, his excitement was obvious. As soon as he stepped through the door, he pulled me into a tight embrace. "3 more days," he said, "and then your aunt will be back. Until then, we'll have plenty of fun." His voice was upbeat, but the implications of his words weren't clear to me at the time. I hoped that these days would pass uneventfully, but my hopes were quickly dashed. He began behaving in ways that left me confused and scared. Over those next few days, I endured situations that I had never imagined. They were unlike anything I had experienced before, and I wished it would all end. For as long as I could remember, my aunt had shielded me from interactions with him. She would send me to my room before he even came home, creating a boundary that kept us apart. I never questioned it. I simply assumed it was how things were meant to be. But her absence changed everything. With no one to intervene, his behavior took a turn that left me shaken. Over those 3 days, I saw a side of him that I had never encountered before, a side that made me wish my aunt had never left the house. When she returned, she brought Adnan with her, a tiny, frail baby who looked far smaller than other newborns. Born prematurely at 7 months, he was delicate and required special care. My aunt's condition was still weak as well. The doctors had advised her to rest completely, so she couldn't move around much. Once again, I stepped in to help. I looked after my aunt and took on the responsibility of caring for Adnan. Though it was a heavy load, I willingly carried it. I felt a sense of duty to my aunt, who had raised me after my parents passed. Her health improved very slowly, and in the meantime, I continued running the household and looking after the baby. Despite her recovery, my aunt remained mostly confined to bed for several months. During this time, I did my best to maintain normalcy, but the presence of my uncle lingered like a shadow. He would corner me in the kitchen or slip into my room at night, always under the pretext of concern or casual conversation. It was a suffocating situation, one that filled me with constant anxiety. Every time I heard his footsteps or his voice, I would freeze, bracing myself for the worst. Even after my aunt's condition improved, I struggled to feel safe in my own home. I began dreading the times when he would return from work, knowing that his unwanted advances could happen again at any moment. Eventually, my aunt regained her strength, and Adnan grew healthier. My aunt resumed managing the household and looked much better physically. I focused my attention on Adnan, who was now an active and curious toddler. I found some solace in spending time with him, as it gave me a sense of purpose and distracted me from the lingering fear I felt around my uncle. Although the worst of my aunt's illness had passed, the memories of what I had endured during those 3 days were still fresh. I couldn't forget, even as life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. As I got older, I noticed that marriage proposals started to come in. Each time I thought I might finally escape. I imagined what it would be like to start a new life, free from the shadows that hung over me. But my uncle rejected every single proposal. He always found some flaw, some reason why the match wasn't good enough. At first I was confused. I thought he might be overly protective, but I soon realized that wasn't the case. He wasn't looking out for my best interests. He was ensuring I stayed under his control. The pattern became clear. He didn't want me to marry at all. Year after year passed, and I remained in the same house, in the same situation. I watched as Adnan grew older, and I began to feel the weight of time. I turned 29, still single, still living with my aunt and uncle. My uncle's dominance over my life had become unbearable. Every time he blocked a proposal, my hopes crumbled further. My aunt occasionally questioned him, asking why he wouldn't let me marry. He would brush it off, saying that he wanted me to have the perfect match. I knew that wasn't the truth. His intentions were clear, and they had nothing to do with finding the best husband for me. It was about keeping me here, within his grasp. I couldn't help but resent him deeply. The anger in my heart burned constantly. I felt like a prisoner in a place that should have been my home. My uncle's actions had stolen so much from me, my freedom, my dignity, and any chance at a normal, happy life. The thought of him filled me with rage. If I had been given the chance, I would have done whatever it took to stop him. The years of torment left a scar that would never heal. Adnan's 12th birthday arrived, and my uncle seemed happier than ever. Adnan was his pride and joy, his only son. My uncle organized a lavish celebration, inviting family and friends to mark the occasion. The party was lively, filled with music, laughter, and decorations. My aunt doted on Adnan, her love for him evident in every gesture. My uncle's affection was also clear, but it felt different, intense, possessive, and unsettling. I couldn't ignore how he looked at his son, how his entire world seemed to revolve around him. That night after the celebration ended and the guests had left, Adnan came to my room to sleep as usual. He climbed into bed and quickly fell asleep, his face serene and innocent. I watched him quietly, lost in thought. Seeing him there reminded me of the time when he was born, when my life had changed so drastically. The events of those days had never left me. They hovered in the back of my mind, returning at unexpected moments to haunt me. Now, with Adnan growing older, I felt both protective of him and burdened by my own memories. The contrast between his innocence and the trauma I carried made those memories even more painful. It was late at night when Adnan suddenly woke up and saw me wide awake. Rubbing his eyes, he sat up and looked at me curiously. "Sister, why aren't you sleeping?" he asked, his voice soft and slightly concerned. I smiled faintly and replied, "I can't seem to fall asleep." Let's play a game. Let's play dolls. My words surprised even me. I hadn't thought about playing dolls in years. I used to adore my doll collection as a child, but after that fateful day when my world turned upside down, I couldn't even bear to look at them. My love for dolls had turned into hatred. Yet tonight, something compelled me to revisit that long-abandoned game. Maybe it was the innocence of the moment, the quiet of the night, or the chance to connect with Adnan. Whatever it was, I found myself suggesting the one game I never thought I'd play again. At first, Adnan looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. "You want to play dolls with me?" he asked, unsure if I was serious. I nodded, trying to make it sound lighthearted. "Yes, why not? I'll be the bride and you can be the groom. It'll be fun." He seemed hesitant at first, perhaps unsure of what to expect, but after a little bit of convincing, he agreed. "All right," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "What do I have to do?" I pulled my scarf over my head like a bridal veil and told him, "Now lift the veil and see your bride." Adnan laughed nervously, playing along and said, "A bride is supposed to be shy, right?" I just smiled and tossed the veil aside. "All right," I said. "Let me show you what happens after the bride and groom get married." Adnan watched as I played my part, still not fully understanding what I was trying to do. He sat there looking more intrigued than worried, as I told him, "Once the wedding is over, the groom takes the bride away to their home. We can't just stay here. Let's go to the rooftop." Adnan looked uncertain. "But Mama will be really mad," he said. "She doesn't let me go out at night." I could see his hesitation, but I played on his trust and the excitement of the game. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," I said. "You'll see. It'll be fun." After some gentle coaxing, Adnan finally agreed. We made our way up to the rooftop through the back stairs. The night was quiet, the air cool against our skin. I could tell Adnan was nervous. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. I reassured him, trying to keep the mood light. From the rooftop, I pointed to the neighboring house, a large bungalow that had been vacant for some time. "Let's go there," I said. "It'll be our new home." Adnan hesitated again. "But no one lives there," he said. "Isn't it locked?" I smiled and replied, "No, the storage room is open. We'll play there." I held his hand firmly, leading him to the neighboring bungalow. The storage room door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dim, empty space. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by a faint beam of moonlight from a small window. It was quiet, eerily quiet. "See?" I said, motioning for him to sit down. "Now we can play our game here. You'll be the groom, and I'll be the bride. Let's see who can win." Adnan sat down hesitantly. His eyes darted around the room, and I could see his unease growing. "I don't know," he muttered. "Mama wouldn't like this." Ignoring his protests, I took my scarf and tied it around his mouth like a gag, then gently bound his hands together. He looked at me, clearly confused and scared. "What are you doing, sister?" he mumbled through the cloth. I just smiled and said, "It's part of the game. The bride always plays tricks on the groom on their wedding night. Now you have to figure out how to get free." Adnan struggled slightly against the scarf, his wide eyes searching my face for an answer. I stepped back, standing in the doorway of the storage room. "Stay here," I said. "I'll get some water and be right back." Before he could respond, I closed the door behind me and quietly made my way back to the house. I returned to my room and lay down, pulling the blanket up to my chin. My heart was pounding, but I felt strangely calm. The house was silent, the only sound coming from the occasional rustling of leaves outside. I knew it was only a matter of time before the household awoke and realized Adnan was missing. Sure enough, a few hours later, the dawn call to prayer echoed through the air. I heard footsteps in the hallway. My aunt was awake. She came into my room to wake me up, as she always did, but I pretended to be asleep. "Wake up," she said softly, shaking my shoulder. When I didn't respond, she called again, her voice growing more urgent. "Where's Adnan?" I yawned and rubbed my eyes, feigning confusion. "I don't know," I said. "I was so tired after the party, I went straight to bed." My aunt's face filled with worry. "Adnan's not in his room," she said, her voice trembling. She searched the entire house, calling his name, and when she couldn't find him, she woke my uncle. When my uncle learned that Adnan was missing, he went into a frenzy. He ran from room to room, shouting his name, tearing through the house in search of him. His panic was so intense that he didn't even pause to think. The chaos quickly escalated, and soon enough, they called the police. Officers combed through the house, the neighborhood, and the surrounding streets. No one thought to look at the empty bungalow next door, its storage room long forgotten by the world. The day wore on, and still, there was no sign of Adnan. My aunt sat crying on the living room sofa, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. My uncle, on the other hand, was shouting orders at everyone, pacing like a caged animal. His voice grew hoarse from yelling, but he refused to give up. Every now and then I felt a pang of guilt. I considered telling my aunt the truth, that Adnan was safe, that he was just next door. But then I would look at my uncle's face, at the desperation and anger etched into his features, and my resolve hardened. Evening approached, and the house had descended into a state of near madness. My uncle had gone from frantic to almost unhinged. I finally approached him, sitting across from him on the floor. "Uncle," I said softly, "why don't we play a game?" He looked at me, his face frozen in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What did you say?" I smiled faintly and repeated, "Let's play a game. You like playing games, don't you? Let's play dolls, or maybe hide and seek." My uncle's eyes narrowed as he stared at me, trying to decipher my words. He didn't know what to say, and for a brief moment, the house fell silent. "Are you out of your mind? My son is missing, and you're talking nonsense." My uncle glared at me, his face flushed with anger. I simply smiled and said, "You played a game once, and now I want to play too. Maybe someone else is playing a game with Adnan now." At this, my uncle's expression changed. His anger grew and he began shouting, "Tell me where my son is. You did something to him, didn't you?" His voice rose, trembling with rage. I responded calmly, "You won't be able to prove anything. If you can commit a sin, why can't someone else? You played a doll's wedding game. I played hide and seek." My voice was steady, but my words struck like thunder. "That night I was forced to be a doll bride. Now you can go find your son if you want." He lost control. Grabbing me by my collar, he roared, "Tell me where my son is. Tell me what you did to him." His shouts were so loud that my aunt came running into the room. Seeing him seething with fury, she demanded, "What is wrong with you? Why are you attacking poor Zoya?" My uncle turned to her, his face twisted with rage. "She's not innocent," he spat. "She's the one who did something to our son. She's taken revenge. I know it. Who knows what she's done to him?" My aunt, shocked, asked, "What revenge? Why would Zoya take revenge on us?" My uncle, now completely unhinged, screamed, "Because I wronged her. I hurt her. And now she wants to make me pay. I think she's killed our son." He lunged at me, his fists raised. But my aunt stepped in and shielded me, her expression filled with disbelief. My uncle's rage was unstoppable. "I assaulted her," he confessed in his blind fury. "She's getting back at me, and I know it." My aunt stood frozen, staring at him in horror. She didn't know what to say. The truth had finally spilled out, and it was as if the room itself had gone silent, absorbing the gravity of his confession. This was exactly what I wanted. I wanted him to feel the torment I had felt, to be haunted by his actions and admit his sins. I wanted him to face the consequences of his cruelty, and finally he had done so. My plan had succeeded. He had confessed in front of my aunt without me having to say a word. My aunt turned to me, her face pale and stricken. "Zoya, did you do something to Adnan?" she asked hesitantly. I answered, "I will tell you everything, but only after you turn him over to the police. He must face justice for what he's done." My aunt hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. She agreed to my condition and called the authorities. The police arrived and took my uncle away. Finally, he was going to pay for his crimes. Only then did I tell her where Adnan was. "He's locked in the storage room next door," I said. My aunt gasped and ran out of the house. Moments later, she returned with Adnan in her arms. He was pale and unconscious. The trauma of being locked away had taken a toll on him. She frantically tried to revive him, holding him close, her hands trembling. "Adnan," she whispered, "it's okay. Mama's here now." Slowly, he opened his eyes. He was frightened and weak, but he was safe. My aunt's relief was palpable, though her tears didn't stop flowing. I knelt before her, my own eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know I hurt you. I put you through so much. But I needed him to answer for his crimes. I needed him to admit the terrible things he did. That's why I did what I did." My aunt looked at me, her face a mixture of sadness and understanding. "You've been through so much," she said softly. "I know you only wanted justice." She forgave me, her strength and grace shining through even in that moment of pain. She saw that I had suffered too, and that her trust had been broken, just as mine had. With my uncle behind bars, life began to take a new shape. My aunt Adnan and I found a way forward together. I apologized to Adnan for what he had endured. "I'm so sorry," I said, looking into his young, frightened eyes. "I know I put you through something terrible. I didn't mean to hurt you." Adnan looked at me for a long moment before saying, "I forgive you." Hearing those words lifted a weight from my heart. We all started to heal, one day at a time. Through it all, I learned a painful but powerful lesson. No matter how strong an oppressor may seem, there is a limit to their cruelty. And when the oppressed finally stand up for themselves, justice has a way of prevailing.